In this video, we delve into sociological research. We'll start by talking a little bit about how the human mind encounters and processes concrete experience. From there, we'll go into the scientific method, and then we'll also give an overview of the different research methods that are used in sociology. We start with this photo, which went viral way back in 2001. You may ask what this depicts. Of course, it is the so-called face on Mars. And there's the problem. The source image is fuzzy in the extreme, but once I labeled it, you're now finding it looks a lot more like a face. The point is how easily we are led to see something rather than nothing, which has consequences for our ability to research the world around us. Here's another example. Church members at a festival in Michigan were convinced they had found the face of Jesus in a pierogi. And then, just for fun, note the resemblance between, on the left, a cyst in a dog's ear, and on the right, someone you might just recognize. What does this all have to do with sociology or with research? Two things. First, reality isn't just something straightforward that is out there for us to grab. Second, these examples show us that reality is instead a complex result of our expectations, our biases, and the limitations in our perception. So let's look a little deeper into the capacity of the human mind and how it lays the groundwork for sociological research. First, one thing our brains are really good at is finding patterns in concrete experience and coming out with something meaningful. If we aren't disciplined about it, we end up with fake news, like a face on Mars or on a pierogi. But when we use that capacity well, we call it inductive reasoning, finding meaning in concrete experience. Second, our brains have an incredible capacity to play with abstract concepts and, like very sophisticated software, to run simulations on how those ideas might connect to concrete experience. We call this capacity deductive reasoning. What sociological research does is use both of these capacities in a systematic way to increase our knowledge about the social world. Here's how it looks. Deductive reasoning starts with abstract concepts. Inductive reasoning, in the top right, starts with careful observation of human social behavior, which brings us to the scientific method. The end goal of the scientific method is to test a proposition or hypothesis about social life against the evidence that we collect. The starting point is an educated guess about a possible relationship between concepts. Maybe we are wondering if people with more money are healthier. In other words, our concepts starting out are wealth and health. The next step is to take our concepts and turn them into something we can measure. How will we define wealth? Maybe we look at people above a certain income. Same thing for health. Maybe we'll define health in terms of life expectancy. The result of this operationalization is that now you've got a hypothesis about a relationship between two specific variables that you can measure. Let's say between your income level and your life expectancy. Finally, we can talk about different types of variables. In our example, income level is the independent variable because we expect that it will affect the dependent variable, which is how long people live. Quantitative research in sociology involves using methods that result in quantifiable results. What this means is methods like experiments, surveys, and interviews. Experiments in sociology involve setting up a controlled situation where researchers can isolate specific variables. Here, you see a researcher observing people through a one-way mirror. Now, the problem built into experiments is that people rarely behave in a laboratory the same way they do in their normal social context. This is why sociologists are more likely to conduct field experiments, which take place in a natural setting. Sometimes their experimental method involves systematic observation of events in a natural setting. The research on the asshole effect is a good example of that. An alternative method is to introduce an independent variable and observe its effect. A great example of this is the pioneering work that was done by Henry and Ginsberg on racism and hiring in the city of Toronto. For this study, they put together two groups of equally qualified job applicants, whose only difference was their racial background. Then they sent both groups out to apply for the same jobs. Not surprisingly, they found that the race of the applicant, in other words, the independent variable, had a significant impact on the dependent variable, their chances of getting hired. There is also a lot of quantitative research done using official documents and statistics. In other words, using pre-existing data and using or combining that data to yield new results. The research on social networks and obesity that we mentioned in Module 1 is a great example of this. It uses two sets of data, one on body mass index and another one on social connections, to arrive at some startling conclusions about the social context of obesity. Now let's look at qualitative research in sociology. The starting point of qualitative research is that it isn't enough just to observe social behavior. We also need to understand what it means from the inside. What beliefs motivate people to behave as they do? The emphasis in qualitative research is to understand the meaning of human activity from the perspective of its subjects. One of the pioneers of qualitative research, the German sociologist Max Weber, used the German word verstehen, which translates as understanding or meaning, to stress the foundation of qualitative research. One very important type of qualitative research is called participant observation. What this means is that the researcher both observes people in their setting and takes part in their activities. Often, participant observation research will involve a sociologist living or working with their subjects for an extended period of time. The tricky part here is the balance between objectivity and subjectivity. A researcher who is too detached from their subjects might well misinterpret what situations mean for them. On the other hand, a researcher who gets too close to them might lose their objectivity. This brings us to something that all researchers, quantitative or qualitative, seek to avoid. But first, a story. In 1939, researchers visited the Hawthorne factory of the Western Electric Company to conduct experiments on factors that would increase productivity in the factory. One of their independent variables was the lighting. And they found that productivity increased when they brightened the lighting in the factory. Unfortunately, they also found that productivity increased when they dimmed the lighting. Eventually, they discovered that people were working harder because they knew they were being studied by researchers. This is what has come to be known as reactivity, or the Hawthorne effect, the fact that people behave differently when they know they are being studied.